Dear colleagues, my paper today is about the lists of the epithets of Zeus in the Orphic hymns. But first of all, I believe that some preliminary explanations about my choice of the topic and my procedures are due. Firstly, the epitheta are used or obligatory in a respectful address to the gods, in which include the name and the epitheta in Homer, including the hymns or Hesiod or the hymn tradition outside the hexameter poetry. And these epithets have been traditionally often divided into generic and distinctive epithets. We could also speak of epitheta ornantia, but actually, for me, only distinctive epithets are important today, which are used for one person, god or hero. However, if we look into the tradition of the Orphic hymns, we notice that the situation there is quite different, and that most or many of the epitheta are the so-called generic type or just respectful, and that the epitheta, which we in case of Homer connect to one god only, might there be used for several gods. Secondly, the genre of the text we study has also some bearings on the usage of the epitheta. In the narrative parts of the epic, as well as in the Homeric hymns, we see many lists, but not so frequently the lists of epitheta. When they do occur, they tend to occur in the direct speech or mimetic parts of the epic or the hymns, where they are bound to addresses. The length of the list of the epitheta the addressee can reflect the importance, the status attributed to him or her, or hero or person, by the speaker. And in case of hymns, we need also to take into account the structure, the ABA circular structure for Homeric hymns, lyric hymnal poetry in general, with the central narrative or grounding part, and the structure where this part is lacking, as usually in the Orphic hymns. Thirdly, connected to the previous two ones, we need to remember the three types of repeated elements in the addresses to the gods in hymns, brought out by Edward Norton in the Agnostos Theos already more than 100 years ago. The direct address to the name, then the epitheta, the participle clauses, and the relative clauses, which all expound the name and allow to increase the importance of the addressee. This also has bearing on my paper today because the distribution of these three elements can be quite different from one Orphic hymn to another. My fourth and fifth preliminaries concern my choice of the hymns to Zeus for this analysis. Fourthly, I'd like to remind you that although Zeus is the king of the gods in the Homeric pantheon, as well as the all-embracing god Stoics, as in the hymn to Zeus by Cleanthus, which I have included at least the beginning and end as number 2 on my handout. Zeus does not appear as over-important in the hexameter hymn tradition. Among the Homeric hymns, the 23rd hymn is directly addressed to him. You can see it as example 1. I'll return to it, with altogether 4 lines. Although he does appear in other hymns as well, at least in his role as father of God. The similar claim actually could be made for the Orphic hymns and the Orphic tradition in general, if we depart from the text included in the edition of Abel. We could find more centric gods in the Orphic tradition if we define centrality by the number of hymns addressed to a certain god, namely Dionysus, Apollon, Helios. However, Zeus does appear as the direct addressee in altogether 3 Orphic hymns. to which I'll return later. And he's also mentioned in numerous other hymns as the father of different gods. And in some other hymns, we are going to see him almost merged with some other gods. And my thing preliminary comes from almost 2,500 years of the traditional Greek hexametric poetry, from the late antiquity to the 16th, 17th century Christological orations, paraphrases of hymns, which uses frequently the epithet of Greek gods, including Zeus, for the Holy Trinity. It's too much to discuss at the present moment, but I think that we need to remember that these influences don't need to come directly from Homer or even from the early modern poetry handbooks, but also for this tradition of naming the Trinity with the epithet used for Zeus or other pagan gods can very well come from the Orphic tradition through Florence philosophical school, Ficino and his students, or through reading Eusebius' Preparatio Evangelica or Stobaeus, but it can't be discussed, alas, at the moment. Now to the business. I'm going to discern some patterns of structural repetition, mostly in the form of the list of epitheta in the hymns connected to Zeus. At first, the Homeric hymn to Zeus, which is, as you see, almost perfectly circular, beginning and ending with distinctive epitheta of Zeus. He and the superlatives, he's the best among the gods is mentioned on the slide, and the greatest. In the end, you see this Gudiste, Megiste echoing the beginning. He's the most excellent, greatest, and these epitheta are used for Zeus only, as well as Chronides, not Chronion. Chronios, but Chronides is distinctively for Zeus, and also Europa, all-seeing, as it's often translated, which occurs only once and in Orphic hymns for another god, namely Helios. And in the middle, the address is not made by distinctive epitheta. This hymn is a good introduction to the Orphic hymns because of its structure, but we don't see it exactly repeated in the Orphic hymns. But perhaps one which is close to it is the shortest among the hymns to Zeus, hymn number 20 to Zeus Astrapaios, which is quite exceptional among the Orphic hymns because of its structure. Not only does it lack the narrative part, which is quite typical for Orphic hymns, but it is actually only one sentence, and it consists of the list of the epitheta with a climax on this distinctive cult epithet of Zeus, the lightning bearer. The other epitheta, except the aeropenge, the bright in the air, which is an hapax, can be used for other gods in the Orphic hymns or other way work. And also many of them, like astraptonta, the participle, or also flamboyanta, fiery, fricorde, frightening, can often and even more appear in Christian texts, not classical poetry. We can go to the next Orphic hymn, slightly longer. I give one version at the end. There's another one for the last verses. Here we see the direct address or the name of Zeus constantly repeated from the first line, twice for the introduction, then also in line 6 and line 9, structuring the whole hymn. And there is one more direct address in verse 3, the Basileus, the king. And the first line, 6 lines here function as an introduction, establishing the two-way connection with Zeus, stressing the honored and everlasting side of his person, giving him the necessary status and respect, but also stressing the position of the speaker and his needs. The prayer itself is a guarantee, a warrant for its fulfillment. You need to give something back to the God in order to receive help. And the lines 3 to 5 stress the all importance of Zeus in his position as a ruler on the earth and under the sky, expressly introduced by the address king in line 3. And lines 6 to 9 are framed by another direct address repetition of Zeus' name, consists only of the list of epitheta and preparing the actual prayer in verses 10 and 11. These 4 lines can be classified to 4 categories. Firstly, Zeus as Kronos' son, the mighty ruler, the beginning and the end of everything. Then the earth shaker and thunder god, and then which is also more distinctive, Zeus as a god of the lightning, Astrapaia, and thunder god. The last verses included only one epitheton, iolomorphe, many forms, which is actually quite illustrating for the Orphic hymns. All the gods have very various forms there, and they can be described sometimes with the same epitheta and lots and the lists of different epithets. Also, in this hymn, we see many epitheta which are more used later in the Christian tradition. Although, as I told, some are distinctive for Zeus and even Kant epithet as Zeus Katabates and Astrapaios. My last example is the 19th hymn to Zeus. I'm not going to read or present the translation, but I want to point out another tactics of construction. It includes only one address to Zeus in the beginning, and then absolutely generic address Makar, bless, before the final prayer. What remains between is again consisting of lists, but this time not of epitheta, but participle phrases and verb phrases, which describe the world which is subjected to Zeus. So here we see another method of structural repetition. Instead of different glorifying epitheta in a quasi-exhaustive list, the world under the supreme God is described by multiplication of elements in this world with different adjectives, different nouns, different verbs. So all these elements are expanding in their turns, and we get a very complex view of the Zeus and perhaps another view of his importance. So, as you've seen, and you'll perhaps see again in the next slide, the epitheta in Orphic things are often not distinctive and can be used to different gods, which blurs our Homeric pantheon. But we still see that the name of Zeus has a connotation of being the supreme god. We see it in pre-Orphic hymns, where the name of Zeus is used metonymically for other gods. Helios is called immortal Zeus, the ruler, the world, fiery one. Pan is called the true horned Zeus, the ruler of the world, with severe anger. And Pluton, which perhaps for us is not so surprising, is called the underworld Zeus, the scepter bearer. And concluding, I'm still working at the epithet of gods, but I hope I could show the images, that the images of different gods in the Orphic hymns are blurred by the use of the lists of repeating epitheta. This might make one image of one divinity, even in the case of Zeus, the supreme god, less clear, but it augments his status by the repetition of the epitheta, but also sometimes variation. Not only different adjectives which honor the god can be multiplied, but actually each structural element of the hymn and the address can be augmented. And so give us the picture of the supreme god, his might and his role. Thank you.